On this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, Jaren Jackson Jr. very clearly listens to and or watches Locked On Grizzlies because he heard me loud and clear. We're going to talk about that with Damichael Cole on this episode. Plus, both Luke Kennard and Brandon Clarke had good games. Who's most important going into next season for the Grizzlies? And we're going to reflect on Marc Gasol as I make my triumphant return to writing about the Memphis Grizzlies. Very excited about that. It's a one-time thing, at least for now. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a terrific Tuesday here on Locked On Grizzlies, and even in this lost gap year, whatever you want to call it, you can argue that the Grizzlies should be losing all these games. It's still nice. The sun still shines a little bit brighter when Memphis picks up a win as they did on Monday night, even against the lowly Detroit Pistons. I am one of your hosts for this episode, Joe Mullinax. It's always good to be able to say that as my co-host, Damichael Cole, back with me. Missed you terribly, partner. I know you're a busy man this time of year, all sorts of things going on at the Commercial Appeal, but it's wonderful to have you back in the saddle talking Grizzlies basketball with me.
Of course. It's always wonderful to be with you. Joe, what color is your shirt there? Is that black or blue?
It's a black shirt.
It's black.
It's a black shirt.
I'm blue. I'm blue today. I thought we both were thinking blue, but
no, it's black. But the black and blue theme is fitting because Jaren Jackson Jr. put a hurting on the Detroit Pistons on Monday night. It was a pretty impressive performance from Jaren. We're going to talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We here at Locked On Grizzlies are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Check us out on YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. Be an everydayer. If you don't check out the show each and every time an episode drops, what are you waiting for? Smash the subscribe button. Come by wherever you get your podcasts and make Damichael and myself part of your Grizzlies content consumption. I alluded to it at the start of the show, Damichael. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be honest with you. I know yesterday was April Fool's Day, and people don't like the April Fool's kinds of content. It can be kind of tricky out there, in this era of misinformation. That's a really tough day. But I don't know that it's so April Fool's-y to say after watching Jaren Jackson Jr., who stunk up the joint against the Orlando Magic this past weekend.
He's had a couple of them.
Yes, and I on Monday's episode, I know you weren't able to be there, I talked about how in order for the Memphis Grizzlies to defeat the Detroit Pistons, Jaren Jackson Jr. was going to have to be the best player on the floor for Memphis to get that job done. And that's exactly what he did. Cade Cunningham had a really good game for Detroit. Makes you wonder what he would look like in Memphis Grizzlies blue. But at the same time, I maybe that's a subject for our off-season episodes. I'm not sure the Grizzlies would use Cade correctly. I think he's in the right place there with the Pistons as they continue to build. But Jaren was better, even though Cade was excellent, and Jaren helped both ends of the floor. Memphis pick up a much-needed win. He had some help in that, right? I talked about how important the matchup with Duren was going to be in that Jaren dominant night. Duren gets hurt early in the game, and that frees up, more minutes for James Wiseman, which, outside of Memphis Tigers fans, that's not really a good thing. If you're a fan of the Detroit Pistons, you don't want to see that much Wiseman. We'll talk more about Brandon Clarke, Luke Kennard. They both looked good as well. We'll talk about them later on in the show. But I really want to focus here, Damichael. You mentioned it. A couple of poor performances from Jaren. This was a reminder of exactly who he is, or at least who he's become in this gap year season for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, here's the thing. And he also reached the 65 game mark as well.
Which is massive.
So shout out to Jaren for
he
reaching that.
He should be
number.
a second team all defense type. I
think that's a conversation we're gonna have, Joe. We need to get into that one because I gotta fill out my voting in the next couple of weeks. I haven't dived into it yet, but we're definitely gonna get there. But Jaren's had a terrific year overall, and the thing about it is, The response in this case was big. Like you said it, you kind of called him out a little bit. You wanted to see the best version of Jaren. We've seen the couple games before that. You see numbers like 1 of 9 and things like that. He had to respond. I know, Jalen Duren got hurt. There was a lot of James Wiseman and things like that. And Jaren is at the point of his career now. If you ask him, what's the difference between Jaren now and a younger version of Jaren, he will tell you, I'm stronger. So you see it a lot with the physicality that he's playing with. Like, Joe, you remember as much as anyone, once upon a time, that was one of the things, like, I mean, people were using the S word a little bit when, like, called him a little soft and things like that. And you're not calling him soft now anymore. Those are the old days. He's playing with physicality. He's playing with force. And you got to have a big bad boy to put in front of Jaren Jackson Jr. if you want to stand a chance. And Detroit didn't.
At least rational people aren't calling Jaren soft, right? Every once in a while, there's a commenter on YouTube who mentions the softness of Jaren, or you stumble into an X Spaces and you hear all sorts of hot takes about Jaren Jackson Jr.
They throw those stereotypes on him.
Yeah,
he's a daddy's boy, and he comes from the 2-parent thing, and all. No, he's a dog. He's got some dog in him. Don't get it twisted. He got some dog.
That's the definition of a hot take, I would say. Jaren Jackson Jr. is a max player in the NBA that isn't currently on a max contract. He will be soon enough. The next time his extension talks can open. I was really impressed with Jaren responding. I was really impressed with Jaren helping lead the team because it wasn't just empty stats, right? And again, you had Iowa and LSU going on. Yeah. I'm a big pro wrestling fan. It was the final Monday Night Raw before WrestleMania, which I'm going to this year, which I'm very excited about this coming weekend. So there was a lot better options on television than Grizzlies Pistons. If you had other things going on, it's understandable. But it was a competitive game, right? Like the Grizzlies, it was a well fought game. Memphis had to come back strong in the third quarter. Yeah. They make a good run. There was clutch situations there as the game closed. And again, you could easily argue that both of these teams, at least their front offices, wanted to lose. But as I talked about on the Monday show, the players and coaches don't want to lose. They want to win. And Jaren Jackson Jr. helped lead that charge. Even though it was with guys that maybe won't be his teammates in 6 months, it was good to see him be in that position to help close out a game. That is valuable, even in a season like this, to continue to have that, because he's not always going to have Ja Morant next to him. He's not always going to have Desmond Bane. And even if he does have them next to him, who's to say that they don't have an off night like Jaren has had the last couple of years? He's expanded his game. Right. These guys aren't robots. They're human beings, right? They're going to have games where they don't play as well. The response is what matters, and the ability to pick up teammates when they're down. Jaren showed that again in this one, and that's what I'm most excited about, even more than the win, to be honest with you.
Exactly. And I think back to that New Orleans Pelicans game, probably the most exciting win of the Grizzlies season, when Ja Morant came back. And, we laughed about it and all of that. But when Ja went in the huddle and he suggested that Jaren take the final shot, and I think it's as wild as it was to hear some people, say, "Look, Ja, what are you doing?" Like, even to us, like, Ja, come on, like, you are. Ja also, he's a very high IQ guy. Ja knows that Jaren has been one of the best isolation players in the league this season. I mean, and we've seen examples of that, whether it was this game against the Pistons, whether it was I forget who it was against recently, the game where he had the game-winning shot, towards the end. Towards the end of that game. But he's had several moments like that, like isolations. I think it was the Spurs, but in isolations.
Yeah, the Spurs.
Yeah, exactly. He's been really good in those situations. And now when you kind of look back at it, at that moment with Ja Morant, it kind of makes me think, like, I get why Ja, was saying that. I mean, it's like you said, if Ja's having an off night, if the defense says, we're not going to let Ja Morant win this game no matter what. Okay. Jaren's one of the best isolation guys in the league as well. If you're going to guard him with that one guy who he feels like he has an advantage against, let's go to that matchup. Whereas in the past, personally, just watching this team, I felt like, hey, it's got to go through Ja. It's starting to shift a little bit. Where, yes, it definitely should go through Ja as much as possible. But we've seen the teams. We've seen the Lakers. We've seen Golden State in the playoffs. Scheme. Timberwolves. The Timberwolves did it. I mean, Ja Morant was not the best Grizzly. He probably wasn't even the second best Grizzlies player in that series against the Timberwolves. You can make an argument that Brandon Clarke and Desmond Bane were the two most impactful Grizzlies players against the Timberwolves. But the point is, Jaren's getting this extra developmental time. Desmond Bane to a lesser degree when he's been out on the floor. It's creating that optionality for next season that you were just touching on, the fact that you can have guys when Ja's having an off night. You don't have to say, well, Ja's 2 of 20 tonight, but we're still going in with the game on the line. You can say, oh, Ja's 2 of 20, but Jaren's 14 of 17, so let's go to Jaren. And I think he's developing into one of those type of players.
He absolutely is. And again, development comes in different forms, right? Like Scottie Pippen Jr. has a rough night. Development comes in different forms. Jake LaRavia continues to show flashes of improvement on a larger sample size. That's a positive. Development comes in different forms. You can develop as a potential third best player on a championship team, right? And the Grizzlies are going to need Jaren Jackson Jr. to keep fitting into that vibe and energy moving forward. So let us know in the comments how you feel about Jaren's performance against the Pistons, how excited you were about it. If you were bummed out that Memphis lost, it was a competitive game. The Grizzlies are jockeying for position, at least in theory, in the NBA lottery. Let us know your takeaways from Monday night's game. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, before we get to some Marc Gasol memories, my first written article in a long time talking about what I remember of Marc and the significance of his retired number coming up this weekend. I know Damichael will be there in person for that. We're going to talk Luke Kennard and Brandon Clarke. We're going to take a look at those two names, two guys that played pretty well against Detroit. How do they fit long-term? Whom is more significant to the Grizzlies as they try to return to championship contender status next season? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get things off our chest, right? Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to somebody who's completely unbiased on your life. Today, I want to share how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. I really struggle with when people look at a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. and they see him having a couple of bad performances. My frustration was more about not taking it upon himself to try to be more forceful. He's going to have off nights, but trying to take that and make it this false equivalency where he's no good and he should be moved on from, that's frustrating. And while that might seem like a little thing, right? That might be something that is a smaller problem than actual life issues. It doesn't change the fact how you feel and how it makes you respond to perhaps larger problems in your life. Therapy can be different for everyone, and it helps to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Brandon Clarke versus Luke Kennard. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, not flying solo this time. Very happy to have my partner in crime, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, back with me. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. All the tremendous work he does for the CA. Make sure you're following me on X at Joe Mullinax. I do Locked On Grizzlies, and I do guest columns every once in a while. We'll talk about that with Marc Gasol here at the end of our show. But Damichael, we focused on Jaren Jackson Jr. at the start of the show. Brandon Clarke and Luke Kennard both did pretty impressive things in their own right. Yeah. Going against the Pistons, looking like, if Cade Cunningham was the second best player on the floor, maybe Brandon and Luke were third and fourth best, respectively.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, and I shouted you out on X. Modern medicine wins. All right, Brandon Clarke looks very, very bouncy, very springy. He looks like the guy that maybe Memphis said if Brandon Clarke comes back at 100%, maybe it makes Steven Adams more expendable. Whatever their plan is this offseason, that we'll certainly talk more about. Whatever that case might be. Yeah. Luke Kennard, he hit 5 threes again and continued that whole top 10 three-point shooter in the history of the NBA thing that I've been harping on all season. Yeah. But he also did his best, Kennard, as a Detroit Pistons player impersonation, and dropped 8 dimes on the heads of the Pistons. So he was an expert facilitator in this game, making up for where Scottie Pippen Jr., again, young player, had an off night, whatever's going on with him, Luke Kennard picked up that weight and helped get the ball across the finish line, so to speak. So going into next season, it doesn't have to be an either or per se, partner. To be honest with you, I think both of them matter because the way that their contracts are structured, these are going to be two names that are going to be popular salary match things and trade machine conversations that I may or may not be privy involved in myself.
I think we know
when the time comes. I'm not going to pretend I'm innocent in that way. But I think that you could pretty easily argue that both Clarke and Kennard are significant to what this team wants to be as a championship contender next season. I don't know that I would move on from either of these guys because of what both of them provide. Kennard is that elite three-point shooter that can do more. And Clarke, what he lacks in that offensive versatility on the perimeter, he is an underrated isolation scorer. He's an elite finisher at the rim and that defensive versatility because of that lateral quickness, that leap ability that he has. He looks like he's 100%, and a 100% Brandon Clarke has probably just as much value as a Luke Kennard, if not more.
Yeah, when you talk about those two players, you said it perfectly. Like they have very distinctive roles with the Grizzlies where they both are needed. But you're talking about, if we were saying, hey, the Grizzlies are in a tight situation, they have to get below the second apron. It has to be Kennard. It has to be Clarke.
The Brooklyn Nets have lost their mind or have decided that Mikal Bridges is not what he thought they were. One of those two you would imagine have to be included for salary matching purposes.
Yeah,
at least if you want to keep Marcus Smart.
Yeah, exactly. And with that being said, I like what both. Again, hey, I gotta say it before I give the answer because I don't want people. What but you like what they both bring. I mean, you can brag on both of these guys why they would be key pieces to a Grizzlies potential, Western Conference Finals appearance or championship appearance. Like both guys have that type of ability. But with all that being said, you're saying either or. I would choose Clarke as of right now.
No, not you.
Listen, hear me out. Hear me out. Everyone knows how, I've talked about the half-court offense, needs to improve in Memphis. And a guy like Luke Kennard has been a potential, somewhat of an answer to that problem. We just haven't seen enough of it with him, Ja, the full band out there and whatnot. But I got to go with Brandon Clarke simply because of the fact that you mentioned it. When you get into the end of the game situations and you're going against certain teams, you need that versatility. You need to have the option of, hey, if we're going against the Nuggets or whatever, and they play Jokic, and Brandon Clarke might not be a fit in that game. We have a bigger center to deploy in that game. But if you're going against teams like the Clippers who like to go small, and you're saying this guy has to get off the floor, you got Brandon Clarke who you can bring off the bench. Having that optionality will take this team a long way. Remember, when Steven Adams was playing off the floor, Xavier Tillman came along, but it was Brandon Clarke who, in the front court, kind of helped the Grizzlies win that series against the Timberwolves. We haven't seen Luke Kennard help the Grizzlies win a basketball series. Now, I look, for all the great things that Luke Kennard brings, when you get to the postseason, teams they're just that much more dialed into the execution. And if you watch those Lakers games, he couldn't get an inch of space. And still, his impact, you can make the argument back to me because I can make the same argument that his impact still was felt because when Luke Kennard was on the floor, the Grizzlies were better, period, simply because of the fact that he got all of that attention. So that's the good part of it. But at the same time, I think he's more replaceable from the standpoint of you can give me a 37% three-point shooter that plays quality defense. I'll live with that rather than losing Brandon Clarke on top of the contract situation. That's the trump card for me. Like they're tight. It's a very close call, but Brandon Clarke, 3 more years, contractual control. Luke Kennard, team option, and then you're potentially, if you re-sign him after that, you're going into the second apron. So that's the difference for me.
The money issue is what I would have brought up too, and that's why I would go with Clarke in this particular hypothetical. I love Luke Kennard. I've talked about that often, and I value the spacing he provides, but at the same time, where that worth will go once he's up for a new contract, that's the major question. Going into next season, I would argue for both of them. I would keep them both. And I do think that if you essentially run it back, right, because now you have Gigi Jackson, you have Vince Williams Jr., you add them to the other guys that are more established, and then you use that lottery pick either to trade for a more established player, or you select a fee-fi-fo-fum like Donovan Clingan, or if you keep both Clarke and Kennard and you decide to go best player available, I think that depending on how you address the center position, which is the one glaring thing they're missing, a true big, how you address that, I'm down for whatever option they go with. As adamant as I have been about Clingan, I think that there is a lane that they can, Nick Richards from Charlotte that we've talked about before. There's ways for them to kind of address the problem without going away from what they have traditionally done in the NBA draft. And it's going to be fascinating to watch play out over the weeks and months ahead. And Damichael and I will have you covered here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let us know how you feel. Would you take Kennard, Clarke? Are you going to cop out like me and say both? I agree. In terms of team building, the correct answer is Clarke. But I'm going to say both going into next season in particular. What say you? Let us know in the comments below. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Marc Gasol's jersey number is being retired in Memphis this coming weekend. Damichael's going to have all sorts of great content, I'm sure, as will others. But I got back in the writing game.
You had to for this show.
For my buddy Parker Fleming. I'll talk about that and some of my memories of Marc Gasol coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, you should be thinking about making the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. I got to tell you, Damichael, I'm excited for my trip to Philadelphia this weekend. I got to get some recommendations for some food spots since you have a bit of a Philly background there. Going for WrestleMania. I can't imagine potentially missing out on the greatest WrestleMania ever because of issues getting a ticket. That's not a problem with an app like Game Time. Whether it's WrestleMania, a high-profile baseball event, opening day, opening week in Major League Baseball, the NBA playoffs coming up, whatever the case might be, there are so many wonderful things with Game Time. Flash deals, zone deals, last-minute tickets, and it's extremely easy to buy and find Major League Baseball tickets in particular with views from all the seats there in the arena. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show, a brief reflection on Marc Gasol. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, not flying solo this time around. Damichael Cole, my wonderful co-host from the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is with me. He does a phenomenal job covering the Memphis Grizzlies. If you haven't checked out his work, you most certainly should. The CA's got you covered as the season closes here. And I'm sure the Commercial Appeal will have you covered regarding Marc Gasol coverage with Big Spain returning to the city, getting his jersey retired, much like Zach Randolph before him. It's going to be a wonderful event on Saturday night. Looking forward to reading all the coverage of that. I covered Marc Gasol pretty extensively back when I was the site manager for SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues. And I would argue that outside of maybe Chris Harrington, I've written more words about Marc Gasol than just about anybody. I haven't written in a while after leaving Grizzly Bear Blues and Bluff City Media, but my good buddy, Parker Fleming, our good buddy, Parker Fleming, invited me to do a guest column, and it's Marc Gasol's Memphis masterpiece, very fluffy, just like I like it. It was a wonderful opportunity.
Like riding a bike, huh, Joe?
Yeah, oh yeah. Coming up with all the byline or all the subtitles and all that stuff. I did not forget, safe to say. But it's free over at Parker's Substack, Subsocalitis, for those of you that are fans of Jake Sokolidis from back in the day. That's what it's called. It's free, no charge. You can make a donation to St. Jude if you want. That's how Parker does his Substack. It's free and available for everybody today. And, I just wanted to take a moment, partner, because I know later on in the week you're going to have a ton of great content to talk about. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on Marc Gasol, what he meant to me. Coming to Memphis back in 2011, please don't tell me how old you were then. But, just interacting with the team for the first time, becoming a writer, becoming a podcaster. I've really connected with Marc Gasol, the way that he played the game. I think he's a wonderful representation of what Memphis can be when somebody from outside of the city comes in and buys into what makes it beautiful. Obviously on a much smaller scale, I try to be that myself even now. Talking about the wonderful time I had in Memphis. And, Marc Gasol is a wonderful son of the city in that way. And I think it's going to be really wonderful to check him out. And, I talked about his play being a masterpiece because he was like an artist on the floor, right? Yeah. If Zach Randolph was the blunt force object, the unstoppable force, Marc was definitely the guy that was, like painting happy clouds and happy trees out there and making these extra passes and doing all these amazing things, heading the ball into the basket like a soccer player. He just had such a wonderful way of going about the game. And, I appreciate you allowing me to hijack our last segment here, partner. Just, check it out. Sokolidis, Parker Fleming Substack, Marc Gasol's Memphis masterpiece. I'm really excited to, check out all the stuff you do. Obviously excited to watch the ceremony on Saturday and really kind of look forward to Marc. Zach Randolph, it could come down to how you define great. Zach is probably the greatest Memphis Grizzly of all time. Marc Gasol, until Ja Morant, was the best player in the history of the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think that his role in grit and grind doesn't necessarily get lost because of that. But I do think at times it can get overshadowed by the personality of a Tony Allen or that undeniable force that was Zach. You can make the same argument about Mike Conley a little bit as well. But, for me, Marc was my guy. I related to him in that way. And it was really fun to watch him play. And I'm looking forward to this weekend and reading your coverage about it, partner.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it as well. Man, 2011, you said, Joe. 2011.
Oh, God. You're going to say it.
No. I'll only thing
I'll say, you? Well, how old were you in 2011?
I'll just say I was graduating in 2011. I won't say whether it was from elementary, middle, high school, or even college. But I will say that I was graduating in 2011.
Oh, you were graduating middle school. I already know. I could have taught you, Damichael Cole. That's all right. But you have a different perspective from me because you came of age in that grit and grind era, literally as a young person. Do you reflect on Marc in a similar way to me? Obviously, being from Memphis, maybe that energy is different. Again, we can talk more about your perspective of it later on in the week. But, I'm just kind of excited to get your view of Marc because I'm sure it's from a different view as me.
Yeah, you said something important, and I'll get more into the memories and things later. But, like, just in terms of what you just said from the standpoint of, like, how his role in the grit and grind era can kind of get, like, sandwiched in between all of the, the first team all defense. That's what we remember, right? That's the big personality. Like that's when you think grit and grind, first team all defense is one of the first things that come to mind. Or you think, Zach Randolph putting, Blake Griffin in a headlock or something like that. Or even though, it happened when he played with Sacramento, but I feel like a lot of people like the Zach Randolph moment where he said, where I'm from, the bullies get bullied.
Bullies get bullied, yeah.
It felt like that was a Memphis moment, even though he was on another team. It still felt like that was the mindset when he was with the Grizzlies. We're bullying the bullies. And Conley as well. You can make that same argument for him. Marc, you can make the same argument for him as you did for Marc because they both were they were steady. Like there wasn't a lot of technical fouls in between the two of them. There wasn't a lot of flashiness. Zebo wasn't flashy, but he was a bucket getter, and bucket getters always get a lot of attention. And TA wasn't flashy in the, I guess, natural way of it, but there aren't too many people where I look forward to seeing them play defense as much as I did, saying, oh, he's got Kobe tonight. I got to watch that just to see how he guards Kobe.
Right.
But with Marc Gasol, it was graceful. Like that's the word that comes to mind. It was, it was like poetry watching him play basketball on both ends of the floor. And then when he got to the last 3 or 4 years, when the passing really went to another level.
And the three-point shooting.
And the three-point shooting. And that was what me and Jaren were talking about the other day after Grizzlies practice. We just talked about, how much he learned from. It's funny, like Jaren talking about, passing, kind of a coincidence. But he was talking about Marc Gasol's passing and just watching like how he would see things way before they happened and would call him out and things like that. You learn a lot from those guys. And Jaren played one, part of one season with Marc, and he talks a lot about what he learned in that time. And there's the other part of it as well with Marc Gasol, the community aspect. I mean, you ask anyone, around here, what he did, whether it was St. Jude, whether it was just being in the community. Marc Gasol was present in Memphis, and that's one of the highest compliments you can give a basketball player from a community perspective is he was present.
Sub-Socolitis, check out my piece about Marc Gasol's magnificent or Memphis masterpiece. Really a big fan of Marc, and it's not like he was perfect. There might be a time down the road where I tell a story about getting a phone call asking, who my source was about Marc Gasol and David Fizdale having issues. And I said my source was my eyes, and then sure enough, Marc was definitely not feeling the data when it came to Fizz. But Marc wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he was very much a Memphian, and I think that is one of the best compliments you can pay somebody. And I mean that genuinely. People like to give me a hard time about not being from Memphis, and I get it. But at the same time, I value that place a good bit even to this day, and Marc Gasol most certainly does as well. So make sure you're checking out that piece over at Sub-Socolitis. Shout out to Parker Fleming for inviting me to write it. Much appreciated. And thank you, dear listener, dear viewer, for being with us on today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Remember, Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, also on Amazon Fire TV, under the free channels app, and all those different areas where you can like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts, make sure Locked On Grizzlies is a part of your process moving forward. The Grizzlies close out their road trip against the Milwaukee Bucks on Wednesday. I'm sure that's something that we'll talk about on our next episode partner. Maybe take a closer look at how this roster, we haven't talked a ton about the new 10-day contracts or, those sorts of guys. Maybe we can take a look at if any of them make sense long-term in Memphis.
Yeah, let's do it. And, they set the record for now, at least. The Pistons and the Raptors are right on their tails. 31 players have played games and whatnot. So there's a lot of players that have come through. How about we saw Tosan Ewama as well, right?
Oh, yeah, revenge game.
Started with the Pistons. But I mean, that's I think that summed that game up perfectly.
Yes.
Tosan Ewama was a guy that a lot of people in the NBA world probably had never heard of, and now he's played big minutes for both of those teams at certain points of this season. So looking forward to tomorrow's show.
Tells you how the season's gone for all of the above, right? But we'll talk about that and more on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for checking out the show. Make sure you're going to Sub-Socolitis if you haven't already done so. Check out my piece on Marc Gasol. Make sure you're following Damichael on X for all the great work he's doing over the Commercial Appeal. And most importantly, make sure you're back with us next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. Free and available wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. We'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies.